Okay, this is Tash Street with Positive Out Loud. Today I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to try to record this interview outside because it's becoming spring-like here in Seattle, and I just wanted to see what it would be like to be outside and do this conversation. And today we have a very awesome guest. We have Paul Weinfield. And what I love about Paul, when I see him online, is that he's just full of wisdom. He's full of poetry and music, and those are three things that I'm passionate about. So, and that's why I wanted to have you on the show, Paul. Thanks for coming on.
For having me. It means a lot.
So I just wanted to tell the guests a little bit about you and you know a little bit about where you come from and what you do. And so Paul is a guiding teacher of downtown meditation, and he has been practicing Buddhist meditation since 1995 and insight meditation since 2004. So he's a musician, a writer, and a former professor of religion and philosophy at Columbia University. So just a little tidbit of your bio there for everybody to know what you do and what you're doing now. So Paul, if you can just start a little bit and talk about what made you get into Buddhist meditation. What are some of the things that drove you to that?
Sure. Well, I started meditating when I was a teenager, when I was in high school, and I was, as many teenagers are, I was somewhat troubled. And there's a lot of stuff in my family. I had to leave New York City, which is my home, and I was living in South Bend, Indiana, which is a big culture shock, and just dealing with all the things that teenagers go through. And working in a bookstore, I was 15, working in a bookstore with a guy who was a very bad alcoholic, and he, in spite of his alcoholism, he was very into Zen Buddhism, and he gave me books and we would talk about it. And I kind of instinctively knew that even though he wasn't really a role model, that he had something that I really wanted to learn about. So at first it was just books, and I would light a candle and sit in my room and just try to figure out what this meditation stuff is, from books. And that gradually led me to study Sanskrit and study Buddhist scriptures academically in school. And then I went to India for a little while. And then I kind of was in my early to mid 20s when I got back to New York, where I'm from, and realized that I really hadn't developed any wisdom, or hadn't really developed any kind of a practical approach to meditation. So I was really looking for a teacher, and I'd looked for teachers in India and sort of failed. I probably interviewed 100 different gurus over that I was there. Nothing really stuck. It didn't resonate, and I came back to my old neck of the woods, to Manhattan, and I met Peter Dubinin, who's been my teacher since 2004. And eventually he asked me to teach, and I started teaching under him. And so that's been the general progression. And I've had different teachers along the way. My outlook on it has changed, but really I found more and more that the Buddhist teachings really have what I'm looking for. So it's been almost a 25-year journey, but it continues.
So you've been meditating for 25 years. That's amazing.
Like that. Yeah, I guess since 19. So
yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about the insight meditation? What is that about?
Well, insight meditation is just sort of a clumsy term for the way that Theravada Buddhism has kind of come into the U.S. So what it really means practically is working with the breath a lot. There's some other types of meditation that fall into that category. There's some hard practices, and a lot of things probably most people have heard of, like loving kindness and things like that have come into the Western vocabulary, but they come from Theravada Buddhism. And so what it's not is it's like you don't use a lot of mantras, or you don't use a lot of visualizations, although sometimes, but it's more really focused around the breath.
So are you doing actual breathing techniques, or you're just focused on your breath?
Well, the sort of particular tradition that I've studied in, the Thai forest tradition, there's a real emphasis placed on ingenuity, and so they don't give you a lot of techniques. They don't say breathe this way. They say breathe in a way that feels good, and that question is it's a very deep question. It turns out, because it's not just about what kind of breathing feels good. If you can learn how to breathe in a way that feels good, you can learn what relationships feel good, and what jobs feel good, and what ways of living in the world feel good. So it's really developing sensitivity, and it begins with the breath, but that's the idea.
And when you're talking about what feels good, are you meaning from what feels good within inside of you from your heart?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, what are some things that have gotten you more connected to that space, to that inward journey, and what tips could you give to folks out there who are having a hard time that just are not connected to that part of themselves that where the peace is?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think breath meditation is very helpful, but you need a way into it. I mean, if you've never done breath meditation, or if you haven't done it for a while, it'll seem a little like, why am I focusing on my breath? There's so much else I need to focus on in my life. So
Hmm.
the image that I find very useful, it's really what's gotten me deeper into it, and I think it works for a lot of people. Is it's just the idea of the inner voice, and it's just the one message I always say to people who have no experience in meditation is just notice how you talk to yourself. Notice not only what you say to yourself, but also the tone of voice that you use, and that constant inner dialogue that's going on. And the way that connects with the breath is that when you start to try to pay attention to the breath, you realize that the only way it's going to work is if you actually talk yourself to the breath. So you start to actually work on your inner voice. It's like, okay, stay with the breath, stay right here in the present moment. You need to guide yourself to the breath, just as you need to guide yourself in life. And the two kind of become one. So, if you're at all curious about breath meditation, before you even try to sit, I would say just notice how you talk to yourself all day long. And if you don't like the way you talk to yourself, then maybe you want to. Does that make sense?
So, like through just like daily things that go on when you're in the middle of something and you start feeling a little stressful, what are some things that you suggest that people do? That's the first couple things they should do when they start feeling the stress. What should they do from that point? I mean, it sounds like I'm making it more complicated than it is, and a lot of people do, and that's the thing. I just want to get to the simplicity of it.
Totally. I mean, just take 5 deep breaths, start there.
Hmm.
And then notice, don't just do that, but notice how that affects the way you're thinking. Because ultimately, if you can stay connected to the breath, you're finding a part of the mind that isn't overwhelmed by all the stuff that's going on out there in the world. And you have to
Right.
start to feel a sense of that. It's like as you focus on the breath, there's a little more space, there's a little more objectivity, right? There's a little more safety
Hmm.
interacting with what happens. So if that feels good, you can just sort of keep that up, and then you might need to think, specifically about, what has led you to this point. So I think one of the things that my tradition is really good about is that you have to find the right amount of thinking. You can overthink things, but you can also just try to like keep doing the same thing over and over again without thinking it through. And with anxiety, particularly, you have to, be honest about like, so what led to this point? Usually, it's that we don't see just how dangerous anxiety is. If we really saw how dangerous it was in terms of just health, physical health, but also mental health, how it makes us conclusions and do things that are not in our best interest.
Hmm.
If we really saw that, we wouldn't hang on to the anxiety. It might come up, but we would kind of like have some disgust around it and want to move away from it. So you have to think that through to a certain extent. You have to kind of like, see, if I go along with this anxiety, like, so what am I going to become? What's that gonna do to me?
Hmm.
I mean, just in the same way that if you're like, someone's like, you want some McDonald's, it's really
Yeah, exactly.
you might actually think McDonald's tastes great. So you have to be like, well, last time I did that, it didn't go so well. It felt horrible. It was tasty, but I felt horrible. Same thing with anxiety. Last time I did that, where did the anxiety take me? Nowhere
Hmm.
good, probably. So
But
yes,
yeah, it's interesting because when you're talking about food, it's like sometimes I find myself just unconsciously getting that thing that I know is going to taste good without even being aware of it.
totally,
So that's a challenge in itself, I think.
totally. And I think you know if you've already eaten the McDonald's, so to speak, but also literal. If you've already eaten the McDonald's, then you want to practice some acceptance, right? There's nothing you can do at that point. You
Yeah,
don't want to up. You don't want to be mean to yourself. You just want to, lie down and wait for it to pass, right?
yeah.
Um, but if you're at the point where you haven't yet eaten the McDonald's, then you don't want to have acceptance, right? Then you want to actually say, wait a second, I've been here before. I'm not going to do this again.
Hmm. Exactly. So,
Because we all have a lot more wisdom than we think, right? We've all experienced the negative effects of stress. It's just that we kind of turn a blind eye to what we already know.
Yeah, and I work in a hospital, and I just see a lot of people who are kind of in the victim mentality, you know, just kind of doing the same thing over and over again, and not really wanting wanting help, but not wanting help, um, and wanting help from somebody, but not wanting to help themselves. So, what are some ways you think that, for somebody like me, that could help somebody to really want to help them? I know you can't make anybody help themselves, but are there some ways where you can open it up to that possibility?
Well, I think in whatever way you can, and yeah, you can't always,
Right.
but to whatever extent you can, I think it's really important to show people the power of their actions. Because I think one of the reasons why we stay in the victim mentality is because we're so much on the level of like, am I good enough? Am I successful? Am I pretty enough? That kind of thing.
Hmm.
And once it's gotten on the level of identity, you can't really, what a lot of times what people are saying when they're in that victim mode is like, just please tell me I'm that person, and what you have to tell them, you're right, you're not a bad person, you're a very good person. You have a goodness and you have this dignity and humanity. And I see that in you, but to express that, you have to actually take different actions. So separating the identity from the action, I think, is important. Because a lot of people in the victim mode, they're very connected. They're like, I'm not going to take any actions until someone else comes from the outside and says to me, I love you or whatever, which is
Hmm.
great. Have that support. It's great.
Hmm.
At some point, people have to see that like your happiness depends on your actions. It doesn't depend on your identity. And I think when people get that, they realize. I mean, it's always an evolving process, right? It's not like I or anyone else has fully gotten it. There are times when I'm like, why is this so hard? And then it's like, oh, it's my actions. I have to take care of my actions.
Hmm.
We're all in that boat, but I think understanding that, yeah, it's a path of action. Is important.
So, do you think it all starts with our thoughts?
Yeah, yeah, on some level. I mean, and
Some level. Hmm.
obviously, it's not just you know, obsessively thinking about things that will help us, but you have to learn how to skillfully think about things, I think, in order to move beyond the victim mentality.
Because I know for my journey, I started, like you, reading spiritual books, doing affirmations, just like changing up the thoughts that are already in my head with and replacing them with something that's more supportive and loving. And then from there, getting into practices. So it was like a long journey for me. And then actually not, and then feeling like shifts, slowly from learning from one thing to another thing. And it's like a slow, like going slowly down, like if you're scuba diving, right? Just slowly going. Yeah.
It has to be gradual because it's not just words. They have to sink in, and you have to become a different person.
Hmm.
Appreciate, you know, the wisdom that you've gotten. I mean, it's like my teacher I've known for 15 years or so, and he says things to me today that he said to me 15 years ago, and they mean something completely different because I'm a different person than I was back then. So I
Hmm.
think it's always really slow. It has to be. We have to be patient.
Right. Patience is a huge deal. I mean, there's a lot of young kids out there, teenagers, that sort of thing. They're having a lot of anxiety, and I think part of it stems from, and we all have, as teenagers, we're trying to find ourselves and that sort of thing. But I think it's more prevalent now because there's more anxiety, more stress, more depression. Do you think part of that is because of social media and kids just walking around with their cell phones?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't think social media is necessarily not. I don't think it's just the cause. I think it's actually an expression of something deeper.
Hmm.
But the comparing mind is sort of out of control right now.
Hmm.
So many opportunities for us to, feel resentful about that person got something that he didn't deserve, and I didn't get something that I do deserve, and we have so many opportunities to sort of develop that sense of resentment around what I deserve, what I don't deserve, and
Hmm.
so we're all kind of walking around with these resentments. And yeah, I don't think social media has made it better, but to some extent, I mean, what I always try to do when I teach kids, it's just like remind them that your parents don't know what they're doing. You know? It's, I mean, it's not like, it's not like there's ever been a time in history when kids have been given consistently good messages. So I guess what I'm saying in the most, compassionate way possible, I think you have to tell teenagers that like it's up to them to develop, you know, an inner worth that's not dependent on, popularity or getting the test scores that their parents want or, whatever.
Hmm.
Taught them the values that they're getting. They should be taught to question those values, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
But then again, in this day and age, I think a lot of kids are realizing they can just be themselves. I mean, we're giving them that openness where they can just like totally be there and love them no matter what. Because it really wasn't like that before.
In certain ways, I mean, I I feel very happy about, like for example, progress in the areas of gender and race and sexual orientation.
Hmm.
Uh, I still think kids are given a very long list of images that they're supposed to conform to, and images they're not supposed to conform to, and the list of images changes, but there's still an enormous amount of pressure on kids to be look and act a certain way. That really has nothing to do with their happiness. It's not like what kids are being told is just like be a good person. They're being
Hmm.
told, be like this, look like this, act like this, and there's so I still think conformity is alive and well in the world.
Yeah, that's true, right? I have a 4-year-old, and my challenge is always like wanting to get her to go within and know that how does your heart feel? Your love comes from within you. That you get to express that out, and that all the stuff on the outside is not where all that comes from. It's from inside of you. And so teaching her that has really helped her blossom, I think, to being a really compassionate, empathetic, but she's always kind of been like that. I've been pretty lucky, but it's interesting trying to navigate that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's such a gift, just
Hmm.
getting a child to understand that they have this guidance system within, is such a gift.
Hmm.
No one really taught that to me, and I was like, I had to learn it later on, and it blew my mind. I was like, wait, all this time I've had this, this guidance system. You know?
But they're really pretty connected to it already, so we
Yeah,
just have to let them be with it, right?
kids are beautiful in that way.
Hmm. Hmm. So when you're doing the guided meditations, are you mainly doing this with adults then?
I've worked with kids. I mean, at this
Hmm.
moment in time, I'm mainly working with adults. I work with everybody.
Hmm.
Anyone who wants to learn. I mean, I love doing it, and I love giving people those tools. I've worked with very little kids. I've worked with teenagers. I've worked with young adults. Primarily, I mean, a lot of the people I work with now are actually quite old, just because of the demographic of downtown meditation, the community that I teach at. Um, which is beautiful because I think it just reminds me all the time that we all have the same kind of mind. I mean, it's like the same insecurities of every life, every decade has sort of the same challenges of like, am I good enough? Am I
Hmm.
am I doing okay? And the same. It's sort of the story changes slightly, but it's the same mind, and so it really gives me a chance to learn about my own practice, and feel like everybody learns so much just from sharing their experience wherever they are in life.
So give the listeners here a little bit of the day of Paul. I mean, how do you start your morning, and how does that work out for you during the day? And when you run across some challenges, how do you face those?
Um, well, I'm actually working on something that might become a book, which is called "Before You Get Out of Bed in the Morning,"
Oh, I like that.
Mhm. Because it's based on the idea that the way we think earlier on in the day really has a lot of momentum. It doesn't mean that the way we think later on in the day is not important, also, but
Mhm.
there's so much momentum that happens, in the first few moments after waking. And the great Thai teacher Ajahn Mun used to really harness that by when he would wake up before he would do any formal meditation, he would just spread thoughts of goodwill to all beings, like just let people come to mind and just wish them well and wish himself well and just wish everybody well, and that's a great way to start a day, And then I got to thinking that like that's wonderful, and then there are all sorts of other things you can do with your mind. So I try to meditate pretty soon after I get up, but I actually, before I do formal meditation, I kind of try to just sort of see where my mind is at in a more informal way. So I'll get up and I'll be lying in bed and just sort of thinking like, so what am I really looking to develop in this day? Um, then I'll usually take a shower, get dressed, coffee, and then I'll do a formal meditation. And then I try to keep the rest of the morning open to the extent I can for doing creative work. So that really means mainly songwriting, but I write a lot longhand. So I'll just be writing in my journal for a while, or I'll be at the piano or whatever. And then in the afternoon, I take care of whatever I have to take care of. In the evening, I usually try to see people I love. So that's kind of a day in the life.
That sounds wonderful. You
Yeah.
get to, that creativity. It just is amazing. Because I'm in a position where it's more analytical,
Mhm.
and so I find that sometimes I forget to be more creative during the day. And I get to do that with this podcast, which is wonderful, but I don't do it on a daily basis. But I think I could do more of that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. To me, creativity is like it's not so much about art, although it can go in that direction, and for me it does a lot of time. But to me, creativity is just being responsive to whatever is coming across the horizon. So it's sort of like seeing. I think that's why there's such a resurgence right now, and like astrology and things like that, which I don't actually do a lot of myself, but I think I get why it's so meaningful to people because we live in an age where it's like it's a very doing kind of culture. Like you get up in the morning and since the day you were born what you're supposed to be doing, and you do it and you do it and you do it, and then try to take a weekend. And I think creativity is sort of like a little different. It's like you don't know what you're doing, and you're just sort of responding to what happens. And so like an astrological prompt could be a form of creativity, or being with a child could be a form of creativity. Children are so like you don't know what you're going to get, you know. So those are all to me forms of creativity. But art is obviously something that is very dear to me as well.
So what do you do to get yourself in that? Do you ever have some creative blocks? And if you do, what are some things you can do to help yourself get through that?
Constantly have creative blocks. I mean, I think blocks are
Mm-hmm.
the essence of creativity. Is it's just sort of one block after another. But I think sensitivity is really the important thing. So I try to, rather than try to push through the block, I try to feel what it's like. So like feeling my way in the dark. And just so I'm not too abstract about it, I mean, a lot of what I'll do is I write. I have a way of writing in my journal where I only write what I can actually hear in my head, as opposed to like what I'm thinking. I don't know if that makes sense, but when I start writing, I can actually hear voices in my head. I think everybody can, and I just write those down, whatever they are. I don't try to make sense of them too much, and then that usually is the way to get unstuck. Whatever it is I'm doing, just get out of the way of myself, and something else comes through.
So you're meaning voices, meaning like the not necessarily your thoughts, but the thoughts of the universe, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure where they come from,
Right.
but the ones that are there, yeah,
Okay.
like I think most people, if they can get still enough, can hear that there's this conversation going on in their heads. It's a little different than thinking for a purpose. It's like if I give someone a math problem, they're going to think for a purpose. But if you're just kind of tuned into what's happening, it's like a radio. You hear like there's this talk radio going on all the time in the head, and it can be very oppressive. But I find that by transcribing that, then I can sift through it and get to a place of actually getting some wisdom out of it, as opposed to just being oppressed by it or annoyed by it or whatever else.
Hmm.
So that's my process. But I know a lot of people are different. I walk a lot. Um, I'll walk for like 6, 7, 8, 9 miles a day, depending on the day. And New York is great for that because it's sort of like you just keep walking and talking to yourself, and nobody thinks you're that strange. So I do that a lot too.
Because when you're out walking, you're just like out in open space, right? And that just, I think that helps open you up to, to that creative space, right?
Totally. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people, they go into nature for that purpose, which is great. I mean, I love nature too. To me, like the city is my nature because when you're with crowds of people that you don't know, like to me, it's like being with trees or plants or whatever. It has that feeling of wildness that kind of inspired me.
Hmm. So I think we were talking about this a little earlier about how people are into the doing and wanting to be successful and create this amazing life and push, push, push. And that's really prevalent right now, especially on Instagram and that sort of thing. Um, and what I found, I was doing that for a while, probably about 5 years ago. I was really pushing myself. I was up late. I was working. I was, just like grinding it. And then I realized that I was just starting to feel like really tired and weak and kind of run down. And and then I decided just to kind of go with the flow and just get back into enjoying life and going on more walks and getting out in nature. And I'm like, what am I doing? What's going on? It's like you have to experience. You have to get to that point sometimes to realize, that's not quite the way I want to go.
Yeah.
And have you experienced that? Have you, throughout? Okay.
Yeah. I can get very frustrated. My trip tends to be like, I'm the only one doing this, or it's going to be done. It's right. It's got to be done by me, like kind of stuff that I learned from a very young age. Um, and the thing I try to remember, and this is kind of like one of been my big life lessons that I have to learn and relearn over and over again, is that there's so much cooperation in life. Because it's so easy to think that you have to work really hard because no one's helping you, but it's like you just tap into this body, right? And so you have like trillions of cells, and they're all cooperating, and the organs are all cooperating, and and like you are adapted to your environment, and you're that's cooperative, and they're and then all the people who have given you this life, and the people who made the clothes that you're wearing and the house that you live in. I mean, you can go on and on and on, and you start to realize it's like, wow, I live in this huge web of cooperation, and it really sort of takes away the perception that you're in it alone, and then from there you realize that, well, okay, if there is so much cooperation, then let me pay attention to what's being thrown to me. It's not that I'm starting with nothing. It's not that I have to do it all myself, or just be a producer. I've been given things. I've been given potentials. Either physical potentials, some money, some whatever, or more importantly, like mental potentials. And from those potentials, I can do something. With this day, and that changes the whole attitude around work. And then you're not grinding so much. At least I found that, and I say this as someone who has really struggled with the grinding mindset in my life a lot. But on my better days, I see that I'm not really grinding. I'm taking things that were given to me and I'm giving back. There's a cycle there, and there's a circle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really important to talk about that, because a lot of people think that's the way to do it because they have to work harder than the other person in order to get ahead. And what does ahead mean?
It's very American, and it's a whole unexamined set of ideas about what life is for. And there are a whole bunch of identities. The identity of being a hard worker is very, very sticky. It can cause a lot of misery. I'm not saying that the opposite, just being lazy, is good either, but it's drag too much identity, as I have very often in my life from being a hard worker. You can really, really mess yourself up.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So earlier you were talking about anxiety,
Mm.
um, and I think part of the anxiety is from the struggle, right? From the grind. Yeah,
Totally.
that's when I become most anxious, for sure.
But I also think, if I'm honest with myself, that I go out looking for anxiety. Right? It's like an old friend, not necessarily a good friend, but it's like it's comfortable. I
Mm-hmm.
see a lot on when I go away on long meditation retreats, because there's like literally nothing to be anxious about. You're just going to be sitting in a room meditating for 10 days, and there's nothing that can happen outside. and the mind goes into withdrawal, and it's like a drug addict. It's like I need my anxiety. So you start thinking of everything that you could be anxious about. And to me, that's been very illuminating in terms of seeing like, yeah, I have a lot of stress in my life. Okay. But, but I also, I delight in this anxiety, to a large extent. It's like I get something out of it. Well, not great what I get out of it, but it's like an unfulfilling relationship, you know.
Yeah, unfulfilling relationship with drama and wanting to know what happened to that person, or what are they doing, or why are they doing that. There's so much that goes on in that. Yeah, I totally get that. And it's something I'm still working on, trying to not focus so much on what other people's drama is, and instead of not looking at my own drama inside of myself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it's good to talk about these things, and we realize that we're all very similar in this way. I mean, I don't know anybody who doesn't struggle with anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
They don't struggle with anxiety. They struggle with depression. It's like one or the other, or both. Um, but this is part of the human experience. These are things that, I mean, I do believe we can transform them, and we don't have to suffer from these things so much. But yeah, I don't know anyone who doesn't work with anxiety on some level.
Yeah, I notice for myself, if I get up and I start the day, like you said, in a very kind of like focus, intentional way of being, of meditating, and being good to myself, loving my body, loving my heart, and starting the day like that. If I don't do that, then the day is going to be a little harder for me.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's really great to see, I think, because I mean, we would change our lives a lot more quickly if we actually made the connections that you're seeing. Because I think a lot of times we don't think it matters. It's like, yeah, I know they say you're supposed to do it, but it doesn't really do anything. And then, that's why I always tell students, like, compare and contrast. Notice on the days when you do it, and notice on the days when you don't. And don't judge yourself, but really just compare and contrast. And they always are like, oh my God, yeah, it's so much better. And even then it takes a long time to develop a habit, but at least you have a fighting chance of developing good habits when you see that, like, this is really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my wife always says, "Did you meditate today? Because you seem like you're a little frustrated."
Yeah, exactly.
I'm like, no, I did it. So maybe I should get here and do, for me, it's like getting that quiet time. I think that's really important for me. And because in this world, we can get so overstimulated with everything that's coming out, so much information and so many things out there that can get us distracted. And I think that alone time for me, because I'm more of an introvert, really helps me out. What about you?
Um, I've never really been able to decide with the introvert extrovert thing. I need a lot of alone time,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm very social, and I really love being with people. I really do. I mean, I guess introverts are supposedly people who get energy from being alone, but I would say I get different kinds of energy from being alone, and different kinds of energy from being with other people. It's different. I mean, I don't like a lot of superficial interaction, but if I feel like I'm with people who I can really have meaningful conversations with, it's a very fulfilling part of my life, for sure.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. You're right. It's I just don't like going to like those parties where people want to talk about the politics, or sports or whatever. It just, I'm like, it's kind of a waste of time for me.
Totally, totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And to me, vulnerability is a lot of it. Like, I mean, if you spend enough time with people who just refuse to be vulnerable at all, it's very exhausting for me. But if I'm with people who I really feel like they're sharing themselves in an honest way, then it can be very empowering and energizing.
Right.
But I do need time, and I do need time as an adult by myself.
It's a balance. I think you're right. Yeah, because there's times where I really want people around that I really want to be able to talk about deep things like this. That's why I created this podcast, because I wanted to go deeper and talk about those subjects, and just be with people who are on that level.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it's a beautiful thing, isn't it? just to
really
sit here and have that conversation.
is. And it's so, yeah, by sharing, we change things. It's really
Hmm. So, do you have your guitar around at all?
I do over there.
If
What,
you,
do you want listening?
yeah, yeah. Why don't we? If you want to, it's up to you.
Um, sure, sure. You want me to play a song?
That would be lovely.
Do we have a time constraint? My songs tend to be a little on the longer side.
No, no, we're good.
I'll play this song just because it seems to be like what we were just talking about. So.
Mhm.
Bedouin moon shone on the world's most lonely man. He was wandering in the desert when he found an abandoned city in the sand. It had silver streams and fruit trees that bent their heavy branches to his hand. He thanked the angel of his loneliness for bringing him into the promised land. Without solitude, love won't follow you. Love won't follow you on your long journey home. Without solitude, love will just swallow you. That's why you and I must learn to be alone. Well, the Bedouin moon is still shining in the teardrops in your eye. No, you don't believe I love you, and my promises don't leave you satisfied. Kill on the art care.
Yeah, right.
There's a place you want to take me, but I can't go there no matter how I try.
You're in rhythm now.
Yeah. On the doorstep of your dreams, but I do not have the key to come inside. Without solitude, love won't follow you. Love won't follow you on your long journey home. Without solitude, love will just swallow you. That's why you and I must learn. That's why you and I must learn. That's why you and I must learn to be
That's awesome. Thank you, Paul.
alone.
So, can you tell everybody out there where they can find you and connect with you, and because you have so much wisdom that you write about on your Facebook, and
Well, you can just connect with me on Facebook. Just
okay,
Paul Weinfield. I use my personal page and as a public thing too.
hmm
They're respectful. I'm very happy to connect with them that way. I'm building a website that's going to have pretty much everything I do in one place. It's going to have all the music and meditation and writing and stuff like that. It's just going to be paulweinfield.com, and hopefully in a couple of weeks that'll be up and running. It's been up and down over the years, but so that's there. And then just Google me. I'm always doing stuff. So
always doing. You're out there. So you're out there playing music. You're writing, and you're doing meditation. So that's awesome.
yeah, yeah.
Anything else? Any truths? Anything out there you want to share with people before we go? Anything on your heart?
Let's see what's on my heart. Just just a gentle reminder for people to just listen to yourself. It's a hard thing to do sometimes, but it's actually something that we're all capable of doing. And um, there's so much inner wisdom, you know. When I people used to say that, I used to think it was kind of a cliche, but it's very, very literal. You check into your body and you can understand so much about, what the next right move is, what the next right thought is, whether you should be in that job or relationship or what you should do. There's just so much wisdom accessible, and don't think of it as something that comes from a book or from me or from anyone else. It's like it's right there.
And it's that first instinct is so important, not to second guess yourself, because whatever comes up literally first is the path, is the direction that's going to be best for you, right?
Often, yeah.
No, nothing is always, of course, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to learn to develop sensitivity, which means you got to feel when there's dissonance, and then feel when there's not dissonance. Very often, yeah, as you said, it's very often there's a clear sense of what to do, and then there's all this other dissonance that comes on top of it. So you have to feel that, and feel that that this is not what I was intending.
Mm-hmm.
Something came in and polluted what I was feeling. But just to feel, it's very important.
Right. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining me this Saturday afternoon of all days. And everybody, I highly recommend you connect with Paul on Facebook. Check out his music. Check out his poetry, his wisdom that he writes about. It actually will take you to a place where you'll start listening more to yourself. I think it has for me. So I really appreciate you. Appreciate all that you do and all that you give to us.
Thank you. I appreciate you too. Thanks. For
All right, Paul. All right. Have a good one. Take care. All right. Bye-bye.